It started as an ordinary evening at my friend's house, until his mother pulled me into the kitchen, turned the lock, and changed everything I thought I knew about her. I still remember that evening as if the house itself had been waiting for me. The air outside carried the warmth of late summer, but stepping onto their porch, I was struck by the sense of comfort that only certain homes seem to hold, the kind that smells faintly of herbs, wood polish, and something quietly simmering on the stove. I had been there countless times before, visiting my friend, but that night felt different before I even crossed the threshold. Maybe it was me, maybe it was her. She greeted me in the hallway with a smile that was casual and familiar, yet something in the way her eyes lingered carried more weight than usual. She looked effortlessly composed, hair swept back, a light cardigan draped over her shoulders, sleeves pushed just enough to reveal the graceful lines of her wrists. There was a kind of poise about her that felt more magnetic than anything I had noticed before. The living room carried the usual noise, my friend calling out, music playing low, the television flickering in the background. But it was the kitchen that drew me, the soft glow of warm lights, the quiet clink of utensils, and her presence moving through it with a rhythm all her own. I found myself watching her without meaning to. She stood near the counter, cutting vegetables with steady, precise movements. The knife tapped lightly against the board in a rhythm that almost matched the beating of my heart. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear with the back of her wrist, and for a brief second her eyes met mine across the space. It should have been nothing, a polite glance, a passing acknowledgement, but there was a softness in it, as if she had caught me watching and didn't mind. She smiled then, not in the wide, practiced way people often smile at guests, but in a way that felt like she was letting me in on a secret. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said, her voice carrying just enough warmth to make me forget to answer right away. I stepped further into the kitchen, inhaling the rich scent of rosemary and garlic that clung to the air. She moved gracefully from stove to counter, her presence filling the room in a way that made the chatter from the living room fade into the background. I became suddenly aware of how different she was from the women I knew, no rush, no loud declarations, just a quiet, assured elegance that drew me closer without a word. And yet, beneath that confidence, I thought I glimpsed something else, a kind of vulnerability in her eyes when she looked away too quickly, as if holding back more than she let on. It was in that first half hour, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, that the evening began to shift. I didn't know it yet, but every small glance, every brush of her hand, every word spoken in that warm light would bring me closer to a moment I never expected. The living room was alive with small noises, the faint buzz of the television, my friend's laughter bouncing off the walls, the sound of glasses clinking on the coffee table. It should have been easy to blend in, to let the night carry on like it always did. And yet, I couldn't shake the weight of her presence, even when she wasn't in the room. Every so often she would pass through, carrying a tray or collecting empty glasses, and it was as if the air itself followed her. She had that ability, to make people turn their heads without trying. But it wasn't the way others might have noticed her, it was the way I did. Small things most people would overlook, the light brush of her hand on my shoulder when she leaned past me, the quick curve of her lips when our eyes met in passing. Once, as she set a bowl down on the table, her hand brushed against mine, not clumsy, not rushed, but deliberate enough that I felt it. Just a second's contact, warm skin against skin, but it sent a quiet current through me. My instinct was to pull away, to hide the way my heart kicked, but she didn't flinch. If anything, her fingers lingered just slightly longer than they needed to, before slipping away as if nothing had happened. I tried to focus on the conversation around me, but every word blurred at the edges. She had unsettled something inside me. I couldn't stop noticing, the way she leaned against the doorway when she listened, her arms folded lightly but her eyes always watching. The way her laughter, low and unforced, cut through the chatter and found its way to me. It was impossible not to compare her to the women I usually spent time with. Girls my age laughed too loudly, filled silences with nervous chatter, spoke in rehearsed tones. She didn't need any of that. There was an assurance in her quiet moments, a kind of calm gravity that drew me closer without either of us moving. But what unsettled me most wasn't her confidence, it was the glimpse of something fragile beneath it. A flicker in her expression when she thought no one was watching, as though part of her longed to be seen in a way she rarely allowed. And I knew, even as I sat there pretending to listen to my friend, that she had noticed my attention. Maybe she always had. A part of me felt guilty, as though my noticing her was a kind of betrayal. But another part of me, stronger, louder, wanted her to notice too. When she walked by again, her hand lightly grazed the back of the couch where I sat, close enough for her fingertips to brush the fabric near my shoulder. And when I looked up, just for a second, her gaze caught mine with such quiet certainty that I forgot to breathe. That glance was brief, but it carried weight. It wasn't motherly. It wasn't casual. It was something else, something I couldn't name yet, but would spend the rest of the night trying to understand. The evening wore on, laughter and conversation rising and falling in the background like the tide. I stayed with my friend and the others, but every few minutes my attention drifted toward the kitchen. I could see her moving there now and then, the soft silhouette of her form lit by the golden light, her figure passing in and out of sight like a rhythm I couldn't ignore. At some point, I felt her eyes find me again. A glance across the room, subtle but undeniable, as though she was checking to see if I was still paying attention. And I was. Completely. Then, with a gentle motion of her hand, she beckoned me. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw attention, just a small gesture that somehow carried all the weight in the world. I rose slowly, trying not to appear eager, though my heart was already hammering in my chest. The others hardly noticed as I slipped out of the room, following her into the quieter space of the kitchen. The moment I stepped inside, the air changed. Gone was the noise of the living room, replaced by the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint simmer of something on the stove, and the comforting fragrance of garlic and herbs that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. It felt almost too quiet, a silence thick enough that every sound seemed sharper, the click of the cupboard door as she closed it, the soft shuffle of her slippers on the tiled floor, even the sound of my own breath. She stood by the counter, waiting. I offered some half-formed question about whether she needed help, but before the words fully left my mouth, she crossed the space between us. Her hand brushed lightly against my arm, fingertips trailing just enough to guide me closer, and then she did something that sent a rush straight through me. She reached past me, closed the kitchen door, and with a subtle twist of her wrist, turned the lock. The faint click echoed in my ears like thunder. I froze for a moment, my mind racing to catch up with what had just happened. A locked door. Just the two of us. The meaning wasn't lost on me, and judging by the quiet steadiness of her expression, it wasn't lost on her either. She stepped back only slightly, her eyes lingering on mine, a question hidden in their depth. My throat felt dry, my pulse a drumbeat in my ears. "Too loud in there," she said softly, almost as if to excuse herself. But her tone carried something else, something unspoken. I nodded, though we both knew it wasn't just about the noise. The lock on that door had shifted the ground beneath us. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer. Every inch between us hummed with possibility, every movement magnified. Her hand brushed her hair back, and I caught the faintest trace of her perfume. The ordinary kitchen, with its shelves and counters and simmering pot, had become something else entirely, a place set apart, sealed off, where the rules of the evening no longer applied. And in that moment, standing in the golden hush of the kitchen with the door locked behind us, I realized nothing about this night would be ordinary again. The moment the lock clicked, the rest of the house seemed to fall away. The laughter from the living room became a distant echo, like something happening in another world. Here, in this small kitchen, it was just her and me, and the quiet hum that filled the space between us. I became hyper-aware of everything. The way the overhead light softened against her hair, casting it in warm tones. The scent of rosemary and simmering tomatoes drifting through the air, mingling with the faint trace of her perfume, subtle, but close enough now that I could breathe it in. Even the sound of her breath felt amplified, measured and calm, though her eyes betrayed something less certain. She leaned casually against the counter, her hip brushing the edge, one hand resting lightly on the wooden surface. But the casualness was only on the surface. Beneath it, I sensed a nervous energy, the same one running through me. "You always seem quieter than the others," she said, her voice low, as though sharing a thought meant only for me. I tried to smile, shifting slightly where I stood. "Maybe I'm just better at listening." Her lips curved, not into a full smile, but into something softer. Something knowing. "Maybe." There was a pause then. A long one. And in that pause, the air thickened. She didn't move away. If anything, she leaned closer, just enough that when she shifted her weight, her hip brushed my arm where I stood beside her. The contact was subtle, almost nothing, but it sent a quiet ripple through me. I could feel the warmth of her presence. The way her sleeve grazed my skin when she adjusted her stance. The nearness of her hand, resting on the counter, close enough that if I let mine fall just slightly, our fingers would touch. I thought about it, more than I should have, and that thought alone was enough to make my pulse quicken. She glanced at me again, longer this time. Not the fleeting glances from earlier, but steady, searching. It was the kind of look that stripped away pretense. The kind of look that made me feel as though she could see every thought I was trying to hide. I swallowed hard, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether words would ruin the fragile thing hanging between us. Finally, she let out a soft breath, her gaze breaking away as if to ease the weight of the silence. She brushed a strand of hair back from her face, and I watched the way her fingers lingered briefly against her cheek. Small, ordinary movements, yet every one of them pulled me deeper into her orbit. The kitchen was still, but my mind wasn't. Every second stretched longer, each glance, each brush of fabric against skin, carrying the kind of tension that didn't need to be spoken aloud. And though neither of us said it, we both knew, something had changed. Something was unfolding between us, quiet but undeniable, in the golden hush of that locked kitchen. The silence in the kitchen stretched, heavy yet oddly comforting. I stood there, uncertain whether to step back or closer, when she finally broke it, not with her usual ease, but with a quiet hesitance that made me pay closer attention. "You know," she began, her voice almost a whisper, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of a glass on the counter. "You look at me sometimes. I notice it." Her words landed with a weight I wasn't prepared for. My chest tightened, heat creeping up my neck. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to pretend she was mistaken. But the softness in her tone stopped me. She wasn't accusing me. She wasn't mocking me. She was opening something. I searched for words, but all I could manage was honesty. I can't help it," I admitted, my voice low. There's something about you." She turned her head then, her eyes meeting mine in a way that held me completely still. No flicker of judgment, no hint of amusement. Just quiet understanding. "You remind me," she said softly, "that I'm still seen." The vulnerability in her voice startled me. She wasn't the untouchable figure I had always imagined, the graceful, composed woman who moved through the house as if she carried the world effortlessly. In that moment, I saw something else, a woman who sometimes felt invisible, who longed to be noticed not just as someone's mother, or someone's hostess, but as herself. I stepped closer without thinking, as though drawn by the truth she had just laid bare. My words stumbled out, unpolished but real. "I see you. I don't think I've ever stopped." Her lips parted slightly, as if my words had touched something deep within her. She let out a breath that sounded almost like relief, her shoulders softening. And then, slowly, deliberately, she reached up. Her fingers brushed my collar, adjusting it with careful precision, though it didn't need fixing. The gesture was small, but the way her hand lingered against my chest, right over the steady thrum of my heartbeat, made it feel monumental. I didn't move. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body was focused on that single point of contact, her palm resting lightly against me, the warmth seeping through the fabric of my shirt, the tender press of her fingers that said more than words ever could. "You're too young to know what you're doing to me," she murmured, though her hand didn't move away. Her voice wavered just slightly, betraying the steadiness she tried to hold. "Maybe," I whispered, "but I know how I feel." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Her hand stayed on my chest, my breath caught in my throat, our eyes locked in a silence that said everything words could not. In that golden hush, I realized, this wasn't just attraction. This was two people, standing on the fragile edge of something far deeper, each waiting to see if the other would step forward. Her hand lingered against my chest, the warmth of her palm steadying and unraveling me at the same time. Neither of us spoke, the silence itself seemed too fragile to break. I could feel my heartbeat thudding beneath her fingers, faster than I wanted it to be, but she didn't pull away. If anything, her touch pressed ever so slightly firmer, as though confirming that yes, she could feel it too. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shifted closer. Not enough to close the space, but enough for me to feel her nearness like a tide rising. The faint brush of her sleeve against my arm, the soft scent of her perfume, everything about her presence pulled at me. Her eyes lifted to mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected, not just attraction, but a kind of plea. A quiet request for comfort, for safety, for someone to hold the weight she usually carried alone. Before I could think, she leaned forward, her forehead resting gently against my shoulder. The contact was so delicate, so human, that I felt every muscle in my body soften. Her breath warmed the fabric of my shirt, and for a moment, I stood perfectly still, not wanting to move too quickly, not wanting to shatter the fragile trust she had placed in me. Slowly, carefully, I raised my arm and let it rest across her back. Her body responded almost immediately, her posture easing as though she had been waiting for that exact embrace. I drew her closer, and she came willingly, her arms slipping around me with a quiet sigh. The world seemed to stop in that moment. Her cheek pressed against my chest, and I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, slower and calmer than mine, but just as real. I lowered my chin slightly, close enough that the soft strands of her hair brushed against my jaw. It wasn't passion that filled me then. It wasn't urgency. It was something deeper, something weightier, the profound stillness of holding someone who needed to be held. I let my hands rest at the small of her back, feeling the warmth of her body through the light fabric of her cardigan. My thumb traced an unconscious circle against the knit, a small, absent gesture that seemed to calm us both. She tightened her embrace briefly, as though afraid to let go, and the sound of her breath against my chest sent a shiver through me, not of desire alone, but of connection. After what felt like an eternity, she drew back only slightly. Her arms loosened, but her hands remained against me, fingertips grazing the fabric of my shirt. She lifted her face to look at me, and in her eyes I saw a mixture of gratitude, hesitation, and something else, something that made my chest ache in the best possible way. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words seemed too small for what had just passed between us. I shook my head gently. "You don't have to thank me." Her lips curved in the faintest smile, tender and fragile, as though she knew that what we had shared in that embrace was something neither of us could explain, only feel. And in that still, golden kitchen, with the door locked and her arms still half around me, I knew this moment would be carved into me forever. We stayed there, suspended in that embrace, until the weight of the silence pressed gently against us, reminding us that time hadn't really stopped, even if it felt like it had. Her arms loosened first, not abruptly, but with the kind of reluctance that made every second of release feel meaningful. She stepped back just enough to look at me, her hand still resting against my chest as if she wasn't quite ready to let go entirely. Her eyes searched mine, soft, vulnerable, filled with something that words could never pin down. "I shouldn't have pulled you in here," she said quietly, though the lack of conviction in her voice made it sound less like an apology and more like a confession. I shook my head. "I'm glad you did." Her lips curved in the faintest smile, one that trembled at the edges, as though caught between joy and sorrow. She let her hands drift down, smoothing the front of my shirt where she had held on to me moments before. The small, tender motion felt more intimate than if she had actually embraced me again. The kitchen, once tense and electric, now felt calmer. Still charged, Yes, but softened, like a storm that had passed, leaving the air thick and quiet. She glanced at the door, the lock still turned, then back at me with a look that made my breath catch. "Sometimes," she murmured, almost to herself, "it's nice to be seen for who you are, not just who you're supposed to be." Her words sank into me like stones into still water, rippling outward, reshaping everything I thought I knew about her. I wanted to say more, to tell her exactly what she meant to me in that moment, but the honesty in her expression told me I didn't need to. She already knew. She reached up, her fingertips brushing against my cheek, a touch so light I might have imagined it if not for the warmth it left behind. Her hand lingered there, cupping my jaw for the briefest moment before falling away. Then, with deliberate calm, she turned and unlocked the kitchen door. The faint click was as sharp and final as the moment it had first locked, yet this time it carried no fear, only the quiet acknowledgement that what had happened inside these walls would remain between us. Before stepping out, she looked back at me once more. That glance held everything: gratitude, longing, restraint, and the fragile beauty of something too rare to be spoken aloud. We didn't kiss. We didn't make promises. And maybe that's what made it so unforgettable. The moment wasn't about breaking rules or rushing into something reckless. It was about presence, about honesty, about two people who had found each other in a space where the world couldn't reach. As I followed her out into the noise of the living room, the laughter and chatter washed over us again, almost jarring in its normalcy. But I carried the kitchen with me, the warmth of her arms, the softness of her voice, the steady beat of her heart against mine. And even now, I know that locked door will always remain with me, not as a scandal, but as the moment I learned what it meant to truly see someone, and to be seen in return. Sparkles, if this story touched you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves slow burn romance, and subscribe for more stories of quiet longing and unexpected connection.